Chapter 1: The Call of an Ancestor. Welcome to Wednesday, What If, by the Storyteller. What if Wednesday Addams was a witch, just like her ancestor Goody Addams? What if Wednesday was called upon by Goody when her powers started manifesting a year earlier than in the original timeline, and she met Tyler before Miss Thornhill, a.k.a. Laura Gates? Like, comment, and subscribe to be updated. Chapter 1: The Call of an Ancestor. Wednesday's perspective. As the car rumbled down the winding road to Nevermore Academy, a familiar chill washed over me. The kind that comes with being surrounded by the oppressive weight of my own thoughts, and the even more suffocating presence of my parents. I didn't want to be here. Nevermore wasn't my choice. But then again, I don't exactly have many choices in life. The visions had come first. One after another. Back-to-back prophetic dreams that demanded I come to this place, visions of an ancient family legacy, of power and danger. It was Goody Addams calling me, her voice echoing through my thoughts. She needed me to act. And so, I had no choice but to obey. But admitting that to my parents? No, that would have been far too simple. Far too vulnerable. So, I did what I do best, I turned my frustration into something else. Something physical. Assault. It was the perfect distraction. At least, that's what I told myself. The only downside? The car ride. A long, unbroken stretch of highway filled with their incessant PDA in the front seat. My mother, always so in love with my father, always so public with it. It made my stomach churn. Suddenly, my mother's voice pierced the silence. "Darling, how long are you planning to give us the cold shoulder?" I didn't even glance up from the window. "Lurch, please tell my parents, I am no longer speaking to them." My father, as usual, took it all with a bemused chuckle. "I promise you, my little storm cloud, you'll love Nevermore. Won't she, Tish?" My mother turned toward me with a smile that was both affectionate and a bit too much. "I have no interest in following your footsteps. As soon as I'm done, I'll either escape, or get myself expelled." "Done with what, darling?" My mother's voice was soft, but there was that edge of concern beneath it, the same edge I'd heard 1,000 times before. I turned my face away, unwilling to give her any satisfaction. My silence spoke louder than anything I could have said. Before they could add anything more, I leaned forward, my voice cutting through the air with cold precision. "You guys are making me nauseous, not in a good way." My father's laugh faltered, and my mother's face softened, though she still didn't understand. "Darling, we're not the ones who got you expelled. That boy's family was going to file attempted murder charges. How would that look on your record?" Before I could respond, the looming gates of Nevermore Academy appeared before us. I swallowed my words, knowing that the conversation was over. 2 months ago, in a vision. Goody Addams was one of the most powerful witches in our family's history. Her presence in my mind was unmistakable, sharp, ancient, and always commanding. "Wednesday," she said, her voice echoing in the silence of my thoughts. "Your powers have manifested earlier than expected. I need you to go to Nevermore and get my grimoire before it falls into the wrong hands." I could feel the weight of her words pressing down on me. A grimoire? Nevermore Academy? It was all too much. "That sounds horrifying," I said, my voice as flat as ever. "But I have no intention of following the Addams family tradition." "This isn't about traditions," Goody replied, her tone unwavering. "All you need to do is take the book. It's yours to keep." I frowned, my mind racing. "Why are you asking me? We have plenty of other family members who would be more than willing to take this job off your hands." Goody's voice became more insistent. "You are the only raven born into this family in 400 years. If your abilities had manifested later, the prophecy would have been set in stone. You're the only one who can do this now." I swallowed, processing what she had just said. "The prophecy? Great. So you're telling me this because you have no other choice," I muttered. "How long do I have?" "A little over a year. Time is of the essence, Wednesday." Get the grimoire and bring it back to the family where it's safe. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to turn my back on whatever destiny Goody was trying to force upon me. But as usual, I had no choice but to comply. I nodded reluctantly. Fine. I'll do it. But as soon as I'm done, I'm out. Goody's voice softened, just slightly. I knew you would, child. Time is running out. And with that, the vision faded, leaving me with nothing but a sense of foreboding and a mission. This might be interesting. Back to the present day. We were sitting in the headmaster's office, Principal Larissa Weem's office, to be precise. The smell of old wood and faint lavender lingered in the air, almost as if the room were trying too hard to be inviting. But the atmosphere was far from welcoming. My parents, of course, looked completely at ease, exchanging pleasantries and glances as if they were home at the Addams mansion rather than in a sterile, fluorescent-lit room. Meanwhile, I sat there, staring ahead, barely acknowledging the existence of either of them, or Weems. 8 schools in 4 years, Principal Weems said, her tone clinical but measured, as if she were reading a list from a report. Soon to be 9. Don't worry, when I'm done, I'll be sure to top off my last expulsion, I replied dryly, not even bothering to look at her. The adults in the room froze. I couldn't care less about their judgment. Expulsion had become a standard part of my educational experience, a badge of honor for surviving their rules, their systems, their tedious attempts at fitting in. Weem's smile was tight. We don't usually accept students in the middle of the semester, but given Wednesday's perfect grades and your family's long history with the school, we made an exception. My mother, always the supportive, perfect image of parental devotion, leaned forward, eyes filled with concern. Larissa, what about Wednesday's therapy sessions? The court ordered them. I couldn't help but smirk. Therapy. As if talking about my feelings would fix the problem. The court order had been another form of punishment, just like this school. But if it kept my parents from complaining, I'd sit through it, just like everything else. Weems nodded, a professional expression on her face. The school has a relationship with a therapist in Jericho. She can see her twice a week. I caught my father's eyes, and his expression softened. You hear that, my little death trap? You're in excellent hands, father said, his voice dripping with pride. I didn't bother responding. I was used to their encouragement, especially when it came to things I didn't want or need. My hands curled into fists on my lap, and I gritted my teeth, fighting the urge to snap at them. We'll see how long she lasts, I muttered under my breath, barely loud enough for anyone to hear. My father, oblivious to my sarcasm, only chuckled. Oh, my little storm cloud, you're going to love it here. Won't she, Tish? My mother turned to me, her face full of that same unnerving, unflappable affection. You'll see, darling, this place will be good for you. And I'm sure you'll find some wonderful people to connect with. I rolled my eyes, tuning out their hopeful expressions. Wonderful people. What a laugh. People here were just like everywhere else, just another source of material for my morbid observations. Before I could tune back into the conversation, Principal Weems cleared her throat, snapping me out of my thoughts. Ms. Addams, she began, directing her attention toward me with a polite but pointed look. I trust we'll be able to assist with your transition here. We'll have you meet with the therapist later today to get started. The words were meant to sound encouraging, but I knew they were just another box to check off. Nothing more. I glanced around the room, catching sight of my parents' hopeful faces. I couldn't stand their optimism. It was suffocating. My mother, in particular, looked as though she'd already decided I was going to flourish at Nevermore, despite my utter lack of interest in the whole idea. I leaned back in my chair, silently wishing for this meeting to end. Maybe I wasn't the one who needed therapy, after all. As I stepped into Ophelia Hall, the heavy door closed behind me with a finality that mirrored my own feelings about this place. The walls of the room seemed to close in around me, their faded colors and dull furniture a perfect reflection of the school's lackluster charm. A girl stood by the window, her back to me, almost too cheerful. She turned as I entered, her eyes widening when she caught sight of me. A bright smile spread across her face, and she eagerly approached. "Howdy, Rumi." The brightness in her voice grated on me. I wasn't in the mood for false cheer. It was forced, insincere. I didn't need any more people pretending to be welcoming. Before she could take another step, I held up a hand, my expression cold. "Don't touch me and I'll make sure you regret it." The words slipped out before I could stop them, calm, but firm. The smile faltered for a brief moment, but Eden quickly recovered. "Oh, right. No hugs, got it." She chuckled awkwardly, running a hand through her blonde hair. I didn't find it funny. In fact, her nervous laughter only made her more predictable. I could tell she was the type who had never been rejected, and that made her both weak and irritating. "Principal Weems," I said, glancing toward the door, where the headmistress had lingered, observing our exchange, "didn't you want to say something?" Weems cleared her throat. "Eden, why don't you show Wednesday around the school?" "Great. A tour." As if I cared about this place. As if I wasn't already mentally trying to escape. Eden stepped forward and motioned toward the door. "Come on. I'll show you where everything is." I didn't need a map to know that the halls here would smell of stale coffee and disappointment. Still, I followed, more out of a desire to get away from the awkwardness of the room than any genuine interest. "Is it true you killed a kid at your old school?" Eden asked, as if the question were nothing more than idle small talk. I didn't miss a beat. "Yes. And if you want to keep your arms, you'll keep your distance." Eden blinked, her eyes widening just slightly, but she pressed on, probably thinking it was just a joke. She had that look about her, the kind of look that expected the world to be nice to her, because she was nice. It was an incredibly naive way to live. She continued, talking rapidly as though trying to fill the silence. "And Bianca Barkley? She's, like, the queen bee here. They say she's dating Xavier Thorpe, the artist guy." I didn't care about the social hierarchies of this place. If Bianca was important here, it would only be a matter of time before I found a way to ruin her little reign. But I didn't tell Eden that. I simply nodded, half listening as we walked. After Eden finished her unsolicited tour, I was finally left alone, which was a welcome relief. My parents had already departed, leaving me here in this absurd place they thought would fix me. They'd never understand. I headed straight for the library. The musty scent of paper and dust was far more appealing than the gossip-filled halls. There was something comforting about the quiet, something that allowed me to focus. "Thing," I murmured, sensing his presence behind one of the bookshelves. "Help me find what I need." The little disembodied hand appeared, popping out from behind a stack of books. "I'm looking for a book, an old, black leather one. Handbound." Thing shifted slightly, the fingers making small gestures, and I sighed. Why did I agree to this? I muttered, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "Did you agree to what?" Thing's fingers signed, fluidly, as if seeking clarification. "That's none of your business," I replied tersely. After hours spent flipping through the pages of book after book, I finally gave in to the growing weariness in my bones. The library had provided no answers, but I was too tired to keep going. Tomorrow would come with its own set of disappointments, no doubt. The following day, I was thrust into fencing class, dressed head to toe in black, an outfit that suited my mood perfectly. As I entered the room, my gaze immediately found Bianca. She stood by the railing, her eyes sparkling with an air of superiority that felt suffocating. She was the queen bee here, I could see that clearly enough. And like all queens, she would fall. The moment we began, Bianca threw a few taunts my way. "You must be the psychopath they let in," she said, trying to throw me off balance. I smirked, the words almost too easy. "And you must be the rising queen bee." "Funny thing about bees," I continued, stepping into my stance, "pull out their stinger, and they drop dead." Her face twisted in surprise, but the fight was on. She charged, but it was sloppy, predictable. I sidestepped easily, parrying her thrusts and landing a clean hit. The class watched, eyes wide as Bianca stumbled, and I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. The look on her face, her shock, was a prize in itself. I didn't stick around for any applause. There wasn't any need to. Like, comment, and subscribe to be notified for updates on this series. As I left the fencing room, I overheard the whispers. "What do you know about your roommate, Eden?" one of the boys asked. "Is it true she threatened to cut off your arms?" Eden's voice, though strained, responded quickly. "It was my fault. I don't think she likes being touched." "She doesn't like anything," another voice chimed in, as if the idea of me being completely unappealing was a new and exciting concept. "She looks insufferable. I heard she killed a kid at her old school." "She's a psycho," someone else said, low enough that I couldn't catch all of it, but the intent was clear. I didn't care. The more they feared me, the better. I didn't even notice Yoko approaching, her voice almost a whisper. "She stayed up all night last night looking for a book in the library." "You know what she was looking for?" one of the girls asked. "No," Eden responded. "Didn't you ask?" Eden hesitated. "I didn't have the guts." And there it was. Let them think what they wanted. Let them whisper behind my back. At least they'd be too scared to approach me directly. That was the one thing I had working in my favor here. The car ride to Jericho felt interminable. The monotonous hum of the engine only added to my growing frustration. I stared out the window, trying to avoid engaging with Principal Weems, who was sitting in the driver's seat. Her attempts at conversation were as insipid as always, but I wasn't in the mood for her patronizing tones today. "Wednesday," she said, her voice softer than usual, as though she thought she could coax me into speaking. "I know you don't like this, but I'm just trying to help. You can't keep running away from your problems." I gave her a side glance, my lips curling into something between a smirk and a sneer. "I'm not running from anything. I'm just not interested in pretending that everything's fine when it clearly isn't." My voice was flat, void of emotion, because there wasn't any to give. Therapy was a waste of time. All these feelings were irrelevant to me. Weems didn't answer at first. She kept her eyes on the road, probably thinking about her next response, trying to figure out how to manage me, to fix me. I could feel the weight of her concern, but it was like trying to sell me water in the middle of an ocean. It wasn't necessary, and it wasn't going to work. "I know you don't see it that way," she said finally, her tone more serious. "But everyone has to deal with their emotions, Wednesday. It's part of growing up. Even you." "Growing up?" I muttered, staring at the passing scenery. "I'm already grown up, Weems. Or do you think I'm a child just because I don't wear a normal mask like everyone else?" She was silent again for a moment. I could feel the tension in the car building, like she was about to say something that might make this entire ride even more excruciating. She didn't understand. She didn't get it. No one did. We reached Jericho soon enough. The small town felt suffocating, like a trap. When Weems parked the car outside the therapist's office, I felt a wave of indifference wash over me. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to talk about my feelings, or whatever else they expected me to unravel. Principal Weems turned to me, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Remember, Wednesday. Just an hour. I'll be right here waiting." I didn't respond. Instead, I pushed the door open and stepped out, the cold air biting at my skin as I walked towards the door of Dr. Kinbot's office. I could hear the faint sound of Weems calling after me, but I ignored it. Inside Dr. Kinbot's office, everything looked exactly as I had expected. The beige walls, the sterile furniture, it was as if they all conspired to make me feel even more out of place. A beige hell. Dr. Kinbot sat behind her desk, a pleasant, almost neutral expression on her face. She wasn't a bad person, I could tell that much, but she was part of the system that was trying to control me. And that was enough to make me want to run. "Wednesday, I'm glad you could make it," she said, her voice soft, but not condescending. She had a calm air about her, like someone who thought they could easily unravel a person like me. "Please, take a seat." I didn't sit. Instead, I stood in the middle of the room, my arms crossed, glaring at her. "I'm not staying." Dr. Kinbot blinked, clearly taken aback. "Pardon?" "I'm not staying." "I don't need this," I said, my voice cold, as my gaze hardened. "You think talking to me is going to fix me? I'm not broken. You're all just wasting your time." Her face remained calm, but her eyes narrowed slightly, like she was trying to read me. "I think you might be surprised, Wednesday. Everyone could use someone to talk to, even if they don't realize it at first." I shook my head, turning toward the door. "I'm not here for talking. I'm here because they thought it was a good idea." I motioned toward the door like it held all the answers. "I'm leaving." Dr. Kinbot stood up, her tone firm. "I think you should stay and at least give it a try. Running away won't help." But I was already on my way out. My hand grasped the door handle before she could say anything else, and in a smooth motion, I yanked it open. Before Dr. Kinbot could react, I slipped out into the hallway, not bothering to look back. I was already plotting my next move as I sprinted through the building's back exit, out into the fresh air. The door slammed open behind me as I took off down the alley, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from the rush of freedom. I had done it. I had escaped. I could hear Dr. Kinbot calling my name from behind me, but it was faint, no threat. No pressure. Just the sound of someone trying to claim what was never theirs. I didn't need this. And I certainly didn't need their help. Tyler's perspective. It was a slow Tuesday morning, the kind where the cafe's too quiet, and even the sound of the espresso machine whirring seems to echo a little too loudly. I was leaning over the counter, scrolling through my phone, when the bell above the door jingled and the usual morning silence was broken. She walked in. Wednesday Addams. I'd seen her around before, but never up close. The rumors around here were endless. Dark, mysterious, from Nevermore Academy, and definitely a bit of an outsider. Everyone had an opinion, and frankly, I'd made mine. She was a freak, but in a way that was kind of interesting. I watched her stroll to the counter, those black boots clicking sharply against the floor, her face expressionless, like she was looking straight through everyone. Her hair was perfectly braided pigtails back, and her dress. Well, it was like she was dressed for a funeral. I had to chuckle under my breath. Jesus. Do you make a habit of scaring the hell out of people? I said, trying to keep my cool, but honestly, I was a little thrown off by how intense she was. It wasn't like she was some sad, misunderstood kid, this girl had a bite to her. It's more of a hobby. Her voice was flat, but cutting, like she'd already decided she wasn't impressed. I need a quad over ice, she said, and for a second, I froze. I was expecting something less intense. Not this. I got the coffee ready, but I couldn't stop noticing how her eyes never blinked. It was almost like she was scanning me, but also not at the same time. Like she was both interested and bored by the world. Didn't know that Nevermore changed up their uniform? I asked, trying to break the weird tension in the air. But instead of looking up or reacting, she just stared at the counter. Put that quad in a to-go cup, she said, deadpan. I didn't argue. It was like giving in to her was the only option. I slid the drink into a to-go cup, deciding to just get on with it. She was different. Like, way different. What's got you in such a bad mood? I asked, trying to keep things casual, mostly because I wasn't sure how to read her yet. Court-ordered therapy, she answered without flinching. That caught me off guard, and I couldn't help but grin. What did you do? Assault and attempted murder at my old school. I paused for a beat, trying to read her. That was bold. And somehow, kind of impressive? It was like she was saying something you'd expect from a villain in a movie, but she wasn't even joking. I gave her a grin. Impressive. How are you not behind bars? She didn't smile, not even a little. My parents pulled some strings and paid them off. Just like how they got me transferred here after my expulsion as a form of punishment. I was taken aback. Punishment? Her parents paid people off to transfer her here? It didn't sit right with me. It made me feel a little uncomfortable. I didn't know what to make of it. My dad was the type who pretended to care, but it was all about appearances. And here she was, talking about how her parents used money and influence like it was nothing. And it wasn't even about them doing it for her, it was for punishment. It just seemed so empty. She wasn't some rebellious kid trying to escape her overbearing parents. She wasn't even trying to fit in. She was here because her parents had basically decided this was her consequence. I could almost feel her detachment, and it hit something in me I didn't want to acknowledge. What would it be like to be that detached? I tried to push the thought away. I'm Tyler, by the way, I said, forcing a normal tone back into my voice. I didn't catch your name. Wednesday, she replied, like it was just another detail in a long list of facts she didn't care about. Why don't you take a seat, Wednesday? I smiled, trying to keep the weird vibe from escalating. I'll be right over in just a minute. She nodded once, turned, and moved to an empty table by the window, looking like she didn't have a care in the world. I went about making her drink, but my mind kept wandering back to her. Punishment. That word kept sticking in my head. My parents never let me screw up enough for real punishment, they just gave me their disappointed looks, but never made a few calls to cover it up. But what was her deal? Her parents were using her like some kind of pawn. It made me feel uneasy. I was still caught up in that thought when I saw 3 guys walk into the cafe. They were the usual loudmouths, cocky, stupid, and clearly looking for trouble. I knew exactly where this was going. I didn't have time to stop them before they'd walked over to Wednesday, and it didn't surprise me that they started giving her trouble. But what did surprise me was how quickly things escalated. She stood up, almost bored, and within seconds, she was throwing punches and kicks like she'd been doing it her whole life. I couldn't help but stare. She wasn't just defending herself, she was taking them down like they were nothing. The leader, the biggest one, was on the floor with a black eye before he even knew what hit him. I walked over, handing her the to-go cup, and I couldn't help but ask, "Where did you learn those kung fu moves?" "My uncle taught me. He spent 5 years in a Tibetan monastery," she said, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. "He was a monk?" I asked, still trying to piece her together. "Prisoner," she said, taking the coffee from me like it was nothing. I blinked, my mind racing. Her life was so far from normal that it almost didn't seem real. I could see the anger behind the calm. The quiet violence. She wasn't just some girl who got into a fight. She owned it. The boys got up, looking angrier than ever, but she just sipped her coffee like it was all part of the routine. "Ready for another round, pilgrims?" she asked them, her tone colder than the drink in my hand. I wasn't sure how things were going to unfold, but when the leader shot me a look, I had to respond. "Don't tell me you're siding with this freak, Tyler?" I could feel the weight of the question. But something about the way she carried herself, something about the fact that she wasn't even trying to be anyone but herself, made me shrug. "What makes you think that one more of you will make a difference?" she said, not backing down. The tension was thick when the sheriff walked in with the mayor Lucas's dad. He saw the situation and went straight for his son. "Is that a black eye? Who punched you, Lucas?" Before anyone could explain, Wednesday spoke up again. "I did." The sheriff looked at her like she'd just committed the biggest crime in history. "You expect us to believe that you beat up 3 boys?" I didn't even hesitate. "It's true, Dad." She put them in their place, and from what I saw, they were the ones who provoked her. The sheriff glared, but Wednesday didn't even care. "I can take care of myself," she said, so flat, it was like she was explaining something obvious. Just then, Principal Weems walked in, and the whole scene shifted. Miss Addams, there you are. It's time for us to go, she said, looking at the sheriff and mayor. Mayor, sheriff, should I ask what happened here? Wednesday didn't miss a beat. I beat them up, she said in that same monotone voice, taking another sip of her coffee. Weems sighed. Of course you did, Miss Addams. Unfortunately, it's time for us to go now. You make it sound like I'm lying, Wednesday said, almost bored. The sheriff narrowed his eyes at her. Don't tell me Gomez Addams is your father. That man belongs behind bars. Wednesday didn't flinch. That's what the teachers and parents told me at my other school, before they got me expelled. Now I'm here, but don't worry, I don't plan on staying long. I watched her walk out of the cafe, not a single ounce of concern in her step. Something about her, the way she carried that effortless confidence, the way her life was hers, it stuck with me. She was a whole other breed. And for some reason, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Wednesday's perspective. It had been a long and frustrating day. I could feel the tension building inside of me, gnawing at my thoughts like a persistent ache. Perhaps it was the relentless barrage of things I couldn't control, or maybe it was just the suffocating nature of this place, but I needed something to cut through it. When Things saw how irritable I was, he suggested, rather helpfully, that playing the cello might be a good way to relieve some stress. Not that I was particularly stressed by anything that couldn't be fixed with a good, sharp solution, but still, I decided to play along. Once I had finished my writing for the night, I sat down and began to play. The deep, rich sound of the cello filled the room, drawing me into a quiet world where the noise of others could not touch me. The smooth hum of the bow against the strings seemed to strip away the layers of annoyance that had piled up throughout the day. It was almost peaceful. Eden must have heard it, because, not long after, I noticed her standing at the door, curiosity written across her face. When I finished, she raised an eyebrow. How did you get that oversized violin out the window? She asked. I had an extra hand, I replied dryly, as Thing, perched comfortably on the windowsill, waved at Eden with his usual disembodied enthusiasm. She recoiled slightly, clearly taken aback. Whoa. Where is the rest of him? Eden asked, blinking in disbelief. No one knows, I said, my tone flat. It remains one of the Addams family's greatest mysteries. I spent the rest of the night in the library with Thing, as was becoming my custom. It was a refuge for me, a place where the questions I had could be answered, or at least explored. I ran my fingers across the old spines of the books, searching for something specific. What are you looking for? Thing scurried across the table, his little legs clicking against the surface, and quickly ducked out of sight. I was about to follow, when I turned around to find a tall boy with glasses standing in front of me. I'm Rowan, he said, his voice lacking any real warmth. We have fencing class together. I blinked, not sure what to make of this sudden intrusion. What do you want? He seemed to think about it for a moment, sizing me up. You're asking me? You're the one who spends most of your time in the library, searching for books like you're looking for something specific. I'm looking for a book that one of my relatives said she left here, I answered, my voice calm, but my patience running thin. He scoffed. There's nothing remotely remarkable about the books in this library. Have you tried the Nightshade Library? What is that? I asked, curiosity piqued despite myself. It's a secret society within the school, he said, his voice lowering to a near whisper, as though saying it aloud might make it too real. At least, that's what I've heard. I gave him a skeptical look. How can it be a secret society if you know about it? I only heard rumors, he admitted, shrugging, as though this was all just passing information to him. Before I could ask anything further, Rowan suddenly lunged at me, shoving me against the wall with his telekinesis. My head hit the cold stone with a sickening thud, and I felt the breath knocked out of me. What are you doing? I demanded, trying to regain my footing. I don't know what your plan is, Rowan growled, his voice low and tense, but whatever it is, I can't let you continue searching for whatever you're looking for. I narrowed my eyes, the sting of the impact beginning to fade as adrenaline surged through me. Why do you care? In response, he shoved a page from a book in front of my face. "You're going to kill me over some lousy picture?" I scoffed, genuinely baffled by the ridiculousness of it all. "My mother drew that picture 24 years ago, when she was a student here," Rowan said, his voice shaking with some emotion I couldn't quite place. "She was a very powerful seer." I stood up straighter, refusing to back down. "So was my mother. My grandmother. My cousin Adele. If anything were to happen in the foreseeable future, they'll know." I raised my hand and whispered the words that had always been part of my family's strange, powerful legacy. "Moneta Sonus." I let out a high-pitched, ear-splitting scream, a piercing C note, that rang out through the entire school. I could feel the vibrations in the walls, the echoes of the sound vibrating through my chest. But Rowan wasn't done. He flung me towards a bookshelf, the force of his grip sending me sprawling onto the floor. Before I could recover, he was on me, his hands around my neck, choking me. The air was growing thin, my vision blurring at the edges. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, and then... "Rowan, stop." A familiar voice. "Xavier." He charged at Rowan, tackling him to the ground. The pressure on my throat eased, and I gasped for air, the taste of blood and fear on my tongue. Other students arrived, gathering around the scene as I struggled to stay conscious. I could see Yoko, Bianca, and Eden rushing towards me. Everything started to go black, and just before I lost consciousness, I heard Yoko's frantic voice. "Stay with us, Wednesday. Don't pass out." But it was too late. The darkness claimed me, and I let it take me. Like, comment, and subscribe to be notified for updates on this series.